Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malman from Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shamet in Highland Park, New Jersey. With me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler in Solomon Schechter, Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed in New York City. It's great to see you. We're recording this on Hanukkah, so it's the last day of Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah. Great to see you. We were, before we were talking about our Hebrew acronyms. So Rabbi Chesler is, for those keeping score here, it's the Richach, the Richach. And Rabbi Kalmanovsky is the Rishak, and I'm the Reim. And we are so happy that you are here with us, all of our viewers. We're getting some real good statistics with the viewers here. Thank you for spending some time with us, learning Torah with us, studying the Parsha. We're really enjoying going through these Breshit, and it's stunning to even think about this idea that we're just 3 Parshiot from the end of Sefer Breshit with Parsha Mikketz this Shabbat. Wow, this Parsha, again, the greatest Parshiot in Torah. There's so much to talk about. We're going to skip over the beginning, which is just the dreams that Pharaoh has, the 7 fat cows, the 7 skim cows, the 7 stalks of grain, and we'll catch up with the moment that Pharaoh is so bewildered, he turns to, or the Sar Mashkim, one of my least favorite characters in the Torah, says, Barry, do you want to just comment on that? I would love to hear your comment.
I have to comment on it. The reason why you don't like the Sar Mashkim, he's later taken over by detective fiction, and it's the butler who always did it. So here the butler does it as well. When we last heard from him last week, he was forgetting all about Joseph. Joseph gave him the great dream interpretation, assured him that he would be returned to Pharaoh's court in his proper role as the wine steward. And Joseph adjured him to remember him to Pharaoh so that he too could get out of prison. And of course, he says, I will do so, and he promptly forgets him. And it leads to this great scene at the beginning of this week. It was my senior sermon way back when in rabbinical school, when the butler announces he has a dream interpreter for Pharaoh, and he says, I mentioned my sins today, referring, according to the rabbis, to the sin that against Pharaoh, which resulted in being in prison, and also his sin in forgetting Yosef. So he remembers at the end that he was supposed to mention Yosef earlier. And, one of the curiosities of this stretch of the Torah is that God is not visible. He appears behind the scenes. And I think here too, we see God operating behind the scenes, that all of a sudden the butler remembers at this opportune time when Pharaoh needs Yosef, and it might not have done Joseph any good had he remembered him earlier.
May I just offer a rebuttal here, okay?
You can try.
I think he is one of the most loathsome characters in the entire.
Oh
yeah.
What do you make of the baker then?
He's not back to talk for himself. This guy is only about self-service. He only thinks about himself. The reason why he says Et chata'ai ani maskir hayom is not out of piety. It's out of the desire for self-advancement. If I do this favor for Pharaoh, if I provide a successful key to unlocking his mysteries, maybe I will be elevated. It's a Haman moment. He really is in that, for me, he's in that category. He's a despicable person. You think he just forgot Joseph. He actively pushed Joseph out of his mind. It was not in his self-interest to remember Joseph, therefore he doesn't.
Well, I love the fact that you mentioned that you compared him to Haman, because one of the things that is, the Bible has a small number of stories. It loves to retell the same stories and loves to allude to other stories. And there's a lot of verbal play in this story, which makes you think of the Esther story, yes. Right? It's a court story. It's about the non-Jew in the court. He wears bigdei shesh. He wears these fine linen garments. And I do think that this story and the Esther story are about Jewish consciousness of hiding, of passing, of manipulating their roles in these much more powerful non-Jewish kingdoms. So I don't exactly agree with you about this character, but I think that the fact of the wine element and the fact that these are all about the court, I do think makes these stories very, very alignable.
Absolutely. And the whole notion of the elevation from nothing to something powerful, is parallel to Esther, and Esther comes out of obscurity. Joseph, really, literal obscurity, the worst he could be in Egypt, and is elevated right to the Privy Council, the that's a Canadian term. Sorry.
The small council in Westeros, in what was the show? The Game of Thrones.
Exactly. He's
the hand of the king,
right up there. So okay. So we're going to disagree about his virtue. Okay, I think he's a despicable character. I think he's an honorable character. Well, maybe not.
He's not the most loathsome guy in the Torah. There's some loathsome people in the Torah.
Actually, right.
In my Jeopardy category of loathsome category.
I'll take loathsome people for 600.
He is loathsome. Okay.
Well, you might put Haman in that category too.
Good. So Pharaoh, we're going to fast forward. Joseph successfully interprets the dream. And this is another great scene. Pharaoh likes the idea, okay? Likes what Joseph has done. And I'm on chapter 41, verse 38. Pharaoh says to his courtiers, the people around him, dude, you see a guy like this? This is a guy. This is a guy.
A guy like this does not come along every day. Are any of you as smart as this guy? None of you are as smart as this guy.
This is a guy, right? So I always like to say.
So here, Elliot, I have to interject here. It's worth mentioning here that we're reading a Hebrew version of the story.
Okay.
You can't think for a moment that in an Egyptian version of the story, this line would appear.
So,
right, it's because the narrative is imbued with the Israelite culture. Writing for the Israelite culture, he attributes the Ruach Elohim here.
Sure.
That's very foreign to the Egyptian view.
But the politics,
and I think we have to mention.
Okay, fine. I get you. I get that this is all seeped in Egyptian kind of, and it's not the verbatim here. But what's interesting here is that there's a political manipulation going on because Joseph comes from obscurity and is dropped into the leadership echelon of Egyptian society. That has got to bother, the people running the show. The lifelong politicians who've been beside Pharaoh for their careers suddenly get a newbie, a new shaven, young, precocious kid who's going to now dictate everything in Egypt.
Right, but he also won the competition fair and square, because when the dreams were presented to them, the Khartoumim, they couldn't explain them. Joseph was able to explain them, so Pharaoh rewards him for serving him better than the Khartoumim did.
Yeah, okay, except for the fact, if you've been Mr., the chief of staff to Pharaoh up until this point, and suddenly Joseph comes in, you're gonna take keys off his keyboard. You're gonna sabotage him. It's not. I don't think unless everybody is really in it together. I don't know. I see that.
So again, this is the story of the minority person.
Yeah.
Right? In the minority community, our guy gets to the top.
Okay.
Because he's so great. And I think that this is one of the things that minority communities like to talk about. They're a guy on top.
Right.
And, it would be interesting to have, even just to think about what an Egyptian version of the story might be.
Well, in my
Joseph
imagination,
might not have been the second in command.
so
He might have been, third tier bureaucrat, helping the guy get he would be the advisor to the Secretary of State, let us say, not the Secretary of State. But in our story, he's got to be the Secretary of State.
Okay.
This is why the story I think is really interesting from the perspective of the Jews or the Israelites. Obviously you're correct, right? We have inherited our story of our person who is prodigiously talented, who has God's ear, who has God's gracious gifts, who is Ish Matzliach. Whatever he touches turns to God. God is with him, and he's Ish Matzliach. But I think that this relates to the classical Jewish consciousness of our efforts to succeed in Gentile kingdoms. The Bible is amazing, though. The Bible is told as the story of a small people, which, lo and behold, just happens to occupy the road between Mesopotamia and Egypt. I mean, it's like you can't overestimate the way in which that shapes the Israelite consciousness. We live on the road between the two greatest empires of the world, and they are constantly interacting with us. And if we're going to succeed, it's because we're going to have to play well in this game. And that's a really hard thing. And so part of the ways that we Jews tell that story about ourselves, this may be a little ugly to say, but this is the story that we tell ourselves. It's a Yiddish cup. The Yiddish cup sees to it that we can succeed.
There's another piece to it, which is worth recalling because you mentioned the Esther story. So we have the Jew Yosef in Egypt, the Jew Esther in Persia, Bavel, and they do great in the non-Jewish world. The Jewish world is the one that's going to collapse in the Bible, right? It's going to be destroyed. The people are going to be exiled, but it's okay because we can make it in Galut.
Okay, so taking on that theme, let's pick up with that and move to, Joseph gets elevated, he gets married off, he marries, essentially royalty in Egyptian society, Osnat bat Potifera Kohen On, the daughter of a high priest, and then he names his children. Jeremy, you want to just tell us, I'll give you the verse, Vayikra Yosef et Shem HaBechor Menashe, Joseph calls his firstborn, Ki Nashani Elohim et Kol Amali, et Kol.
He names the first child he names Menashe, which means cause me to forget all my suffering. Joseph, who has been treated, by his native family so difficult, so bad. I mean, yes, he is tremendously talented. Yes, he is the one with these veridical dreams that remind him that he is in fact much more important and much better than his brothers. But of course they hate him, and of course they make him suffer. And his own ambivalence, he wants to forget all of that pain. He wants to forget all of that suffering. So he names his child, he names the first of those children, Menashe, God made me forget all my suffering. How about the second one?
Yeah, but except for the irony of naming your child, you've made me forget. The irony.
So, yeah, it's a great irony because in addition to hanging the lantern on all the stuff that he needs to forget, there's a wonderful midrash that'll be relevant as the Parsha goes on, that when the brothers come to Egypt, they speak to each other in a language, in Hebrew, and there's an interpreter between Joseph and them. They don't know that Joseph speaks their language because he's acting as if he needs the interpreter. And the midrash holds that the interpreter is Menashe, meaning that this child, whose name means forgetting, who perhaps even knows his father not as Yosef ben Yaakov, but as Tzafnat Paneach, with his Egyptian name and his Egyptian wife and his Egyptian clothes, and he's riding the Pharaoh's chariot and he's wearing the Pharaoh's ring. Joseph taught that child Hebrew. Joseph somehow gave that child the connection to all the pain that he ostensibly wants to forget, but he doesn't want to forget it. He actually does preserve it. That ambivalence is to me a really strong character of Joseph.
Right.
So part of it has to
go ahead.
Has to do with his discomfort with who he is, right? Because he names the child that God has caused me to forget my suffering, because there are going to be times when Joseph, is going to remember his suffering, and the name Menashe is going to remind him he has to forget about it.
So
That's not where he is anymore.
would you think that Joseph is racked with a certain degree of doubt, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, that he has been elevated to this status and doesn't deserve it, is undeserving, or his identity? I mean, this is certainly one of the pieces of tension in the story.
I think
he is hidden. His real
the
identity
Galut is a precarious place.
Exactly.
Right? You can never be, this is the original Zionist dream. You can never be too sure of where you are when you're in Galut.
Well, take the second name then. Ki Ifrani Elohim be'eretz oni. Jeremy. Ephraim.
Ephraim is named Ki Ifrani Elohim be'eretz oni. God has made me fertile in the land of my affliction. So, what is the land of my affliction? With respect to Menashe, he made me forget all my suffering and made me forget my ancestral home. But now here, Ephraim's name is Ifrani be'eretz onyi. God has made me, Ifrani Elohim be'eretz onyi. God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. The land of my suffering has to be Egypt in that story, in that line, right? Yeah. So Ephraim means that even though I am in Galut, and I think that Elliot, what you were saying about the ambivalence and uncertainty, on one level, he's absolutely certain. He has just totally kicked butt. He came out of prison. He told Pharaoh, you need to get the smartest guy to run things for you. And by the way, the smartest guy happens to be standing right in front of you. And Pharaoh says, you're right. I've never seen anybody quite like you. You are the man. You are the big guy. And I'm going to make you my number two. But Joseph's own ambivalence is exactly all those things that you were saying. He is called to return to Beit Avi, and he is called to think of Egypt as Eretz Onyi, as he's called to return to his ancestral home, and he's called to think of Egypt as a place that is also his alienation.
All right, so then
and it's going to prefigure Moses' name for his child, Gershom.
We move on into
because he was a ger in a strange land.
The famine now ensues, and the turning point, or at least one turning point here, Vayar Yaakov ki yesh shever b'Mitzrayim. Jacob sees that there's shever, which means food or rations or something of substance in Egypt. The Midrash likes to pun on the word shever, also is sever, which is hope, or shever as shivaron, as brokenness. Okay, so Jacob sees that there's the possibility of sustenance there, and dispatches the brothers, that is 10 of them, to Egypt, that is without Benjamin. And here again, heartbreaking scenes of the Bible category. Okay,
for 400 daily double.
So this is where the beginning of the encounter. Vayavo achei Yosef vayishtachavu lo aparim arza. The brothers of Joseph come before him and they bow down to him. Vayar Yosef et echav vayakirem. He recognizes them. Vayitnaker. So I for my neshama, just take me into the space between Vayakirem and Vayitnaker. Jeremy, go with that.
He recognizes them. He sees who they are. He was got to remember, the Bible will tell us when the brothers are feeling bad about this, that Joseph, it won't have recorded this back in the episodes when they were happening, but as the brothers talk to themselves about their own suffering before Joseph in Egypt, they will say, do you remember he was begging us and we ignored him? He was calling to us. He was pleading with us to take him out of the pit, and we ignored him. That was them at their worst. And so he presumably sees all of that, and vayitnaker alehem, and he acted as a foreigner to them. He did not respond to their suffering. And at the simplest semantic level, he acted as a foreigner. He was not Yosef ben Yaakov. He was Tzafnat Paneach. He was wearing his Egyptian clothes with his Egyptian name, his Egyptian wife, his Egyptian kids, his Egyptian family. And he says, I have nothing to do with you. And we know that they once said, we want nothing to do with you. And now it's his turn to say, I want nothing to do with you.
Okay,
but he doesn't really do that. He doesn't, in fact, the ambivalence of Yosef is the best part of him, because he at the same time, he does feed them, he does take care of them, and he sets it up so that 25 moves down the chessboard, there will be a reconciliation.
It's precisely at that moment that he has to make a decision. It's a strategic moment between the recognition and the acting as foreign or acting cruelly to them. Vayitnaker has a lot of range here. It's not only, he's standoffish. He makes a decision that he's really gonna bust them. And the story obviously could go in so many different directions. He could have been happy to see them. He could have revealed himself immediately. He could have said, "Here," but why he does that? Why he becomes vindictive? Do you agree with me that he's vindictive here?
Oh, of course. He does have a lot of water under the bridge, and they threw him in the pit. They heard him begging. They said, "The hell with you." By the way, speaking about Barry said before about the names of Yosef's children, echo the names of Moshe's children. Vayakom melech hadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yada et Yosef. The Egyptians will come to a spot where they don't know Joseph, and there's a foreshadowing of all the people who pretend what they don't know, and the things that they pretend are they deny the connections that are actually real.
All right, so Joseph charges them. He says, "Miraglim atem, you are spies. Yirot et ervat haaretz." Whoa, you have come to see the nakedness of the land. All right.
Joseph is a character. Joseph is a character whose vulnerability and whose clothing are very essential to the whole sets of stories. We know that Joseph's clothing in the coat of many colors, in the clothing that Potiphar's wife snatched off of him, in the clothing that he wears in prison and is changed to come up to Pharaoh, and then is changed yet again, the very fancy clothing that he gets when he becomes Pharaoh's number 2. And he says to them, "You've come to see the nakedness of the land," which might be the vulnerability of the land, and it might be in this global crisis of famine. But I can't help but thinking that he's saying, "You're going to see my nakedness. You're going to see the vulnerability that you're going to see." Was that Yosef?
That was me.
It was Yosef. No, it was Yosef calling you. He wants to say that. But Joseph is saying, "You're going to see my vulnerability. You're going to see my nakedness, and the perhaps the fakery that is him dressing up as Tzafnat Paneach."
That's interesting. So you're seeing the charge is really a projection of his own vulnerability. That's brilliant.
Kol haposel b'mumo posel, as the Talmud says. Anybody who accuses somebody else of defect, they're really naming the defect that they feel about themselves.
Barry, the reaction of the brothers, or
it begs the question though, and I was going to mention this earlier. Why does Jacob send 10 brothers to Egypt? That should be an immediate red flag, right? That they're doing something. What?
They have to have a minion. They have to daven.
Actually, by the way, that's not a joke. The Yerushalmi learns out the minion from the 10 brothers, not from the 10 spies, which is much better, right? I would much rather.
Depends on how effective your prayers are.
I would much rather derive the source of a minion as 10 from these 10 brothers than from the 10 faithless spies.
Okay, so that's your point, and that's a very nice point. So, but when they show up in Egypt, that's a threat, because why are there so many people in one band?
Yeah.
And I suspect that it says something about the size of Egyptian families as well, that they probably tend to be much smaller. So they assure him, they say we're the sons of one man and we're honest, which Radak, David Kimchi, suggests they're honest about being the sons of one man. They have to reassure Yosef that they're telling the truth. But it does raise a question about their honesty altogether. Are they really honest people? they've been deceitful with their father. They're deceitful perhaps throughout, in the great story of Yehuda and Tamar, I think one can make the case that Yehuda is deceitful as well. And it's like a running thread, their deceit. But in their own eyes, they see themselves as being honest. They told the truth once, and that will carry the day for them. So
we see the irony of their state, how righteous they are. I mean, leave it to a stealthful person to proclaim how innocent they really are, and how much guilt they are living with in what they did with their brother. Okay, so we don't have a lot of time left, but let's just. So what happens? What happens is Joseph says he locks them all up. He ends up taking Shimon as a hostage. Comment on that, Jeremy. Shimon, poor Shimon.
This is a great element in the narrative because, I mean, I could say this next week at Vayigash, where Vayigash is really the strongest thing, which is that the Talmud says, how do you know you're a Baal Tshuva? Like, when do you know you really repented? When you're in the same situation where you once did something bad, and this time you choose to do something good. Like, you could still sin, you could still replicate your bad action, but this time you decide to turn it around. So Yosef seems to be repeatedly saying, okay, we're going to keep throwing brothers into pits until you guys rescue one of them. And we're going to ultimately, they're going to reconcile when Judah rescues Benjamin next week. But this week, he says, okay, guys, I'm going to throw Shimon into the pit. And they go, okay. See you later.
Okay. And they go back to Jacob, right? And Vayomer Alehem Yaakov Avihem Oti Shikaltem Yosef enenu v'Shimon enenu v'Tikach, because they have to bring Benjamin down. And it's like at that point, Jacob says, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Joseph's gone. Shimon's gone. Take him. And here you got to feel. We don't really have a chance to talk about the emotion of the story. There's so much emotion. Right? There's just so much crying. There's tears. There's anguish. There's guilt. There's frustration. And
we're all parents. We're all the three of us are blessed with 4 children apiece, and we love them. And I have to say that there is no nightmare. We've also in the rabbinate, we've also in our work known people who've had the ultimate loss. You cannot even conceive. Elliot, your parents.
That's right.
Your parents lost children. It's the ultimate loss, and I can't even conceive of it. And so the emotion of the Jacob evinces in this story. When he said, we talked about this last week, that he refused to be comforted. Man, I just the emotional strength of the story is about that unimaginable loss. Now it's happened twice, and I'm worried it's going to happen a third time, and I just can't bear it.
So we didn't talk about this prior to this, but again, heartbreaking verses of scripture. Okay, Joseph sees Benjamin in chapter 43, verse 29. Is this your brother? Is this your little brother? Yes. He can't hold it back. And what does he go by? He goes to cry. He has to go into a back room to bawl his eyes out. And then he gets you gotta love Joseph here, the fortitude of the character, but you see he's broken. He washes his face, has to go back and face them. I'm sorry. And that word is going to be significant next week. He just has to kind of push it all down. I love it. It's just all about emotion. All right, we leave off at the end. Take us to the end of the story. Benjamin.
Harry, hit it. Tell us about the bags and the food and the cup.
So they're ready to go back again. And what happened the first time, of course, their money was returned to them secretly. And they're very puzzled and troubled by that. And they're reassured that Pharaoh was paid, that God must have given them the money. And now the same thing is going to happen. But this time, in addition to the money being returned in the sack, the goblet of Yosef is going to be put in Benjamin's sack. And almost as soon as they leave, Yosef is going to send a servant to get them. And, it's reminiscent of the scene with Lavan in the way that they behave, because they say things that they really should not say. They're so sure that they're all innocent that they say that let the person who took it be dead and we'll all be your slaves. And Joseph is going to say to them, I'll just keep the guy who has the goblet and you're all free. And of course, the guy who has the goblet is going to be Benjamin. And, it's reminiscent when Laban comes looking for his household gods, and it's a trope that appears elsewhere in the Torah. Rachel, when she has Yosef, says that God has given me one more son, and the Torah makes sure that he has exactly one more son. And to make sure that there can be no mistake about that, she's going to die in childbirth of having Benjamin, who she likes to call Ben Oni, the son of my suffering.
Okay, so they find the thing in Benjamin's sack, and here clothing vayikru simlotam, they tear their clothing, vayamos ish al chamaro, and they vayashuva ir, and they go back to the city, and this is where the parsha ends off, really at the cliffhanger. Judah, go ahead, Jeremy.
No, I was just going to say that obviously the Torah doesn't make the parshiot. Jewish tradition has made the parshiot, and the fact that this one ends off on the cliffhanger. Oh, well done, Jewish people. You have left us there, waiting to find out. Is Benjamin? Like I said before, Joseph in the pit, they let him go. Shimon in the pit, they let him go. Now Benjamin's going to be in the pit. Are we going to save him? You better come back to shul next Shabbos.
I know people. I remember there was one professor who says, whenever I get to this part, I always read the next parsha during the Haftorah.
But we didn't get to the Haftarah, which is
we were going to get
to the Haftarah. The Haftarah is the story of the two prostitutes who are fighting over whose child is the Lo ki b'nei chamet u'b'ni achai. Your child is the dead one. No, your child is the living one. Your child's the dead one, mine's the living one. No, it's mine who's the living one. Yours is the dead one. The famous Bible story. This is our Haftarah, which we often don't read because it's usually Chanukah around here. But this year we're actually going to get to that Haftarah.
Yeah, there's just so much content. It's all emotional, all beautiful, all great storytelling. It's if there was a Shabbos to be listening to the Parsha and the Haftarah, it would be this Shabbos and next Shabbos.
And we thank you, and the one after that. And we thank you guys for all being here.
That's it. So we've come to the end of our conversation. This is been very joyful as we are ending up the Hanukkah, full night of Hanukkah tonight. We're doing this on Thursday. But we want to wish everyone a beautiful Shabbat and enjoy the joy of Torah as we have enjoyed it sharing with you. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.